everybody's doing really well today. So I am going to do my first ever tutorial, which I'm so excited about, also super duper nervous. But I get messages all the time, like comments on videos being like, hey, do you mind showing us how you did that? Or, can you show us the technique for that? And I've never done a tutorial video before because I don't really consider myself an expert in coloring by any means. But I've been working on the technique of laying down marker first and then coloring on top of that. And I have to say I'm really enjoying the results, and I figured maybe I could kind of talk through how I did my shading and how we got to the point that I did. And then obviously if you have other tips and tricks, please feel free to leave them down below. I would love to improve this technique. In no way am I done working on my skills, but so far I'm really enjoying it. And I will be showing you today in the 50 Christmas Miniatures by Camilla Angelkova. This is her new miniatures book. In full honesty, it's also my first miniatures book. I don't own any of the other ones. And for some reason, I thought the book would be smaller, maybe because it has the word miniatures in it. But this is a full-size coloring book, and therefore the pictures in here are not actually miniatures, like they're giant. So that really threw me off. But I am coloring this picture, and then I'm using a magazine to cover half of it. But what I did is I went in and I laid down the alcohol marker base for the whole image, and then I did shading only on half of it. So you can kind of see a pre and a post in a way, and then that way you know if you're interested, in seeing my technique based on the results that I was able to get, right? So this side is just marker. I used my Ohuhu markers. The brown in here, like the hot chocolate brown, was dying. I threw it out after this, so that's why it's splotchy. But I figured, since it is technically a beverage, you can kind of get away with a little bit of wishy-washy. And then this is the half that I actually did shading on. So as you can see, there's quite a difference, especially between like him, like the cookie man, and I did obviously shading around the bow. I really like how that turned out in the buttons, and I did the shading in the cup here as well as the candy cane, the cup, and everything. So I really like how this side turned out, and that's why I decided to do the video. So first things first, my biggest tip for when you are doing the marker base and then coloring with colored pencils or just coloring with alcohol markers in general is when you are picking your colors, let them dry. So I swatch them out on a piece of paper, and then I decide, for example, which brown I wanted to select or which red and stuff. Wait for them to dry. That took me like multiple pictures to be like, okay, like this is not turning out the way I wanted to, because I would swatch the color and I'd be like, oh, perfect, that's exactly the shade I wanted. And then go in directly and color in the picture. But then when it dries, it's a completely different shade. Lighter, darker, maybe like a different pigment comes out. Let it dry. So now I will swatch, for example, a handful of browns and basically walk away. Let them fully dry, and then I will decide which colors I like. So that is, you might think, wow, like obviously that's so self-explanatory, but in full honesty, I didn't know that. I didn't practice that for multiple pictures. So I'm sure I'm not the only one. But that's definitely the biggest tip for the marker side of things. And I will go in with some colored pencils now. So maybe we can start off with a candy cane and get that bad boy settled. So I am using a combination of my Prismas as well as Brute Funners. Sorry, I'm trying to find the pencil. And I own a 12-pack of Prismas. I've mentioned that multiple times. And I honestly think like just the 12-pack alone is a great purchase. So if you don't want to bite the bullet and get the big packs, because I know they're quite pricey, do at least get the 12-pack if you wanted to obviously try them. I think it's wonderful, and I've been loving having the Prismas. So with the candy canes, I feel like they are one of the easier things to color in here because the shading is usually in the exact same places on candy canes, or at least the way I do them. I don't know. Again, I'm no expert. So I always go in with a shade that's just a little bit darker than the dried alcohol marker that you have. Also, do let your picture dry before you go in with pencils. So I go in just on the sides and do just a little bit of shading. So something that I don't want to say I don't believe in, because it's not like a faith, but I don't think that like once you shade something, you're done with it. I am continuously going back in and adding more, because maybe you did a little bit of shading, then you color something next to it and you realize, oh, the first object maybe should be a little bit darker. So just because I'm doing just a little bit of shading now does not mean that I am done with it. I will probably come back and add more layers. So I'm doing shading on each side, but not in the middle. It might be a little bit hard to see because this color, again, is not that much darker, but that's the way I intended it. So it's a little hard to color that way. Let's do this one. So let's add that a little bit. And then I will also go in later and add shading on the white parts of the candy cane. But right now I'll just focus on the red sections. Also, how does everybody feel about candy canes? Do you like them? Do you not? Are you impartial? I don't know. I never was a huge fan. Maybe I would have like one a season, if that. But not a really big mint candy fan. Plus, I feel like eating a whole candy cane is dedication. Like there's just a lot of it. I get bored and I just want to put it down, and that's a waste of candy. So I hope you can see the difference between those two. So I'm just going to quickly turn the book. It's just easier for me to color this way. So please do excuse the horizontal book. So that, I think, the first layer is good. So then I'm going in with a little bit of a darker shade. As you can see, it's more of a browny burgundy. And this one is a Brute Funner, while the first one was a Prisma. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over the same sections that I just shaded, but not go as far in as I had done with a prior red pencil. So again, you're just adding layers of shading or of shade onto these objects. And I quite often will pause and be like, okay, realistically, where would the shade be falling? So for example, here with a bow, the bow would cast a shade on the individual or on this cookie because it's above him and the light comes down. So, like, I know it sounds like a little kooky, but sometimes you have to like think these things through. If you wanted to add the shading, obviously you don't have to. I feel like a lot of people color in these books just straight coloring and then bedazzle them, or add glitter stickers, and absolutely nothing wrong with that. I'm just somebody who enjoys adding the shading. So just going in, and the Brute Funners and the Prismas do mix quite well. I haven't had any issues with using them, swapping one for the other. So now that the red shading is done, I'm going to go in with a white Prisma and just add the highlights. So I really, really like the white Prisma. I think it's super duper buttery. And this is a pencil that if I ran out of, I would, buy, is it open stock? But you can just buy the pencil. So just going in and adding a little bit of white. And you can always go in with, for example, the first red pencil and blur the edges a bit if you think it looks a little harsh. I'm going to finish this and then take a look to see if I want to do that as well. So the red of the candy cane is done. And since I already have the red pencils next to me, I'm gonna go in and work on, work on the hat, for example. So again, this comes down to kind of where you imagine the source of light being. So I'm going to picture that this pom-pom's leaving a little bit of a shade. So we'll go on the bottom of it and add a little bit of shading here. And this is that red Prisma color that I first used on the candy cane. I chose to keep the palette here quite consistent because first of all, it's easier that way because you have to pull less markers and less pencils. I keep the pencils out on my desk while I'm still using them, so I don't want to have 50 pencils out because my desk is going to look ridiculous. Therefore, I try to keep the smaller color palette, but then also it tends to be more cohesive that way. So, and I'm just gonna do a little bit of shading up here. Okay. And yeah, and then similar technique, I'm gonna go in with that deeper brownish red Brute Funner and just basically go over the same areas, but not pull in towards the center as much. There we have the red shading done. So then I'm going to whip out the white again and just maybe add a little bit of a highlight through here. Just a little bit. And I know a lot of people use a white gel pen to provide highlights. That is always also an option. Since I'm coloring with pencils here, I figured I could do some of the highlights in pencil, but I'm not fully sure. I might go back in towards the end, like when I'm done, and add a white gel pen. I always wait until I'm fully done with the image before I do those final touches. And then we can move on to the little buttons. So circular things tend to be on the easier side to color because you just kind of do this and then pick a side of the circle to have the highlight. So I'm going to pick the top left here to have the highlight. So then this is going to be the darker side. And again, if you have other tips and tricks, please share. I would love, love, love to learn more and improve. So adding the little darkening here. And then shocker, shocker, I'm gonna go back in with the brown or the reddish brown and just emphasize that darkening here on the bottom. Just add a little bit of dimension to these little hair ties that she has. Makes me think of those hair ties I had as a kid that would like rip out half of your hair. You know, they had it was like 2 rubber bands basically, and then 2 little like balls, like decorations on the side. And then first of all would like bang into your head and then also like pull out half of your ponytail. Remember those? Love the 90s. Okay, so then that is done. If you wanted to add a little extra dimension, you can always go in even with a darker color. So for example, I could maybe add a little bit of black on the bottom if I really wanted to. Obviously a very light hand, but that adds a little extra dimension. I have to say I use the black pencil very, very often, but very, very sparingly because, you know, for shading, you only need a little bit of it to make an impact. So I will finish these off camera, just not to bore you, and then we'll be back to shade the cookie and the hair. So I finished the buttons, and now I figured we could maybe move on to the hair. So I wanted to do a little bit of shading around the face, and I am using another Brute Funner. Sorry, no. Oh, it is a Brute Funner. Okay. For a second, I thought it was a Prisma. So again, I'm just going back to where realistically the shading could be falling. So since the hair kind of falls behind the head, I'm adding a little bit of shading on the hair. And as you can see, the pencil that I've chose is just a little bit darker and also a little bit warmer than the marker I had chosen for the hair. It's not hair for that part of the cookie. So, and then also, I'm assuming the hat would cast a little bit of a shade. So I'm going in here a bit. And I'm just gonna add a little bit of shading there. And then also assuming that this little hair accessory casts a little bit of a shade. Just add that here. Okay, so that's step one. Let's do this side. Again, a little bit of shading from the hat and the hair accessory. Just a wee bit. Okay. So, and now that I think it looks okay, we can go in with a slightly darker shade of brown. This is a Prisma. And then again, just going over the areas I already went over, but not going in as far. And yeah, that's basically the technique that I have been using. So you do obviously the marker first, let it dry, and then go in with a colored pencil that is just a little bit darker than the marker you had chosen, and then over that layer with a even darker shade in places that to you are logical for shading. And I think that would depend on each person, because maybe you think the light comes from one side, and in my head it makes sense to come from a different side. But yeah, and then of course in the end, if you want to add just a little bit of extra shading, you can always either go in with a white and make a highlight, like for example here in the necklace, or come in with a dark pencil like I also did here, just a little bit of black shading on the bottom. Just use a very light hand, because when you think of shading, like think of if you saw a shade in your everyday life and it was black, like you know that it is dark. So that is why I always use a light hand when it comes to that. And then I would say that her hair looks pretty good. And then maybe I can go in with the black pencils I was saying and just add a little bit right around the face. But yes, I'm really enjoying how this picture is turning out. I will work on finishing it. I should be able to finish it today, and you'll definitely see it in the completed pages for the month. I'll also, obviously do the cup and everything. But yes, thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful, and please also let me know of any tips or tricks that you know, and I'll see everybody in the next one. Bye.